court-stamped restraining order sat on the mahogany coffee table, a white flag of surrender signed by a judge who had run out of patience. Beside it lay a digital recorder, the kind used for field interviews, containing 48 hours of continuous audio that had transformed a neighborhood nuisance into a criminal defendant. The silence in the house was heavy, but for the first time in months, it wasn't an appose. The silence of someone hiding. It was the silence of someone who had finally finished a very long, very tedious job. My name is Elias, I'm 32, and I'm a forensic acoustic engineer. I spend my days analyzing sound frequencies to determine structural integrity or the origin of mechanical failures. Precision is my trade. Documentation is how I get paid. My home is a mid-century sanctuary with cedar siding and wide windows that look out over a valley that usually hums with nothing but the wind in the pines. I value the acoustic purity of the space, the way the floorboards don and appos, creak, and the way the world stays outside when the heavy oak door clicks shut. It was a place designed for stillness, a reward for a career spent in the deafening vibration of industrial sites. I thought moving into a neighborhood with air and quote, dead and quote, HOA meant I was buying into a community of like-minded adults who valued privacy. Instead, I had purchased a front-row seat to the resurrection of a bureaucracy that existed only in the mind of one woman. Karen moved in 3 houses down, but her presence was felt immediately through the rhythmic, aggressive clack-clack-clack of her orthotic sandals on the pavement. She carried a brushed aluminum clipboard as if it were a scepter, her knuckles white against the metal. Whenever she approached a property line she intended to violate, she wore a smile that stayed on her face 3 seconds too long, a calculated baring of teeth that never reached her eyes. And quote, community visibility concerns and quote, she said, tapping her silver pen against the clipboard as she stared at my side yard. And quote, per our guidelines, Section 4, Paragraph B, all secondary waste receptacles must be housed in an approved enclosure. We strive for a uniform aesthetic to maintain the collective investment. And quote. I looked at the single bag of grass clippings sitting neatly beside my bin. I and appos am not in the HOA. Every home is part of the ecosystem and she replied, her smile widening as she checked a box on a form. The rules are the only thing holding us back from total societal collapse. I'll be keeping a ledger of your progress. And I didn't and appos, argue. I just watched her clack away. The first escalation was small, a mere test of the waters. A week after our first meeting, I found a fluorescent orange and violation notice and taped to my front door. The adhesive was industrial strength, clearly meant to leave a mark even if the paper was removed. It cited in quote, unauthorized botanical growth, referring to a small herb garden I kept on my windowsill. I didn't and appos, tear it off in a rage. I took a high-resolution photograph of the notice, preserved the original metadata, and filed it in a folder labeled harassment_log_01. I then sent a polite, certified letter to her address requesting the specific legal basis for the citation, given my non-membership status. Goal: establish a paper trail of non-consensual contact. Mechanism: certified mail and time-stamped digital photography. Next morning, same sandals, same clipboard. She moved on to Alex. Alex has a golden retriever that wouldn't and appos, heard a fly, contained by an invisible fence that kept his yard pristine. Karen claimed the dog was Aaron quote, vicious breed liability and quote, and that the invisible fence was Aaron quote, violation of subsurface utility easements. And quote. Alex tried to explain, but she simply spoke over him in a rapid-fire burst of legal-sounding nonsense. And quote, per the 1988 Charter, all canines must be physically tethered. Your refusal to comply is creating a hostile environment for the local fauna. And quote. Alex looked at me, bewildered. I simply held up my phone, recording the exchange from my porch. Karen began leaving notes on every windshield on the block. The notes claimed that because she was the only one paying in quote, dues in quote, to a defunct board, she had been granted in quote, emergency administrative oversight. And quote. She publicly announced at a neighborhood mailbox gathering that she was in quote, the shield protecting our property values. And quote. That same evening, I caught her on my perimeter MIC using a flashlight to peer into my garage, trying to find a reason to call the city. She wanted in quote, public safety in quote, for her image and in quote, private voyeurism and quote, for her ego. That told me everything I needed to know. A very specific, very cold kind of rage settled into my chest, the kind that doesn't and appos, make you want to yell or throw things. It makes you want to read. I spent 3 nights in the county archives, pulling every deed on the block. I wasn't and Appos, T looking for a loophole for myself. I was looking for the tether that would pull her down. The discovery came from Karen's own arrogance. In her latest administrative decree flyer, which she had printed on high-gloss paper and shoved into our mailboxes, she had included a small, grainy scan of what she claimed was an authorization of Lien authority. She had titled the original digital file on her home computer Lien_leverage_draft_01, and the scan was so poor I could see the edges of the document she had used to forge it. It was a letter from a real estate agent she had worked with years ago, talking about a completely different property. She had digitally spliced her current address onto it. I sat back in my chair and laughed out loud into the empty room. It was so clumsy, so desperate, and so incredibly illegal. I didn't and Appos, T call her. I didn't and Appos, T confront her. I began building a case she couldn't and Appos, T explain away. The public collapse happened 2 weeks later. Karen had called the police for the 4th time in 10 days, claiming that my unnatural Teal door was causing visual impairment to motorists and that Ben, our neighbor across the street, was running an unlicensed daycare because his 2 children were playing in a sprinkler. She arrived on the sidewalk as the patrol car pulled up, dressed in a blazer as if she were heading to a board meeting. She was smiling, holding her clipboard like a shield. Officers, thank God she started, her voice switching to that high-pitched, practiced vibrato. I feared for my safety when the homeowner became aggressive about the zoning violations. Section 12 clearly states, Ma and Appos, the officer interrupted, his voice flat. We and Appos, not hear about the paint. We and Appos, here because we received a forensic report regarding the mailings you've been distributing. I stepped off my porch, holding a tablet. On the screen was the side-by-side comparison of her forged Lien document and the original real estate letter I had recovered from public records. That was the instant Karen collapsed without physically moving. Her posture stayed upright. Her face didn't and Appos, T. Her eyes darted to the tablet, then to the officer, then back to the clipboard. Her mouth opened and closed, a silent, fish-like motion as the logic of her world evaporated. Is this your signature on the bottom of this and Appos, administrative decree and Appos, Ms. Henderson? The officer asked. She began to ramble. The community visibility. The Jews pay for the streetlights. I'm the only one holding this together. It's a yes or no question. The officer cut her off. She tried to pivot, pointing at me. He's a predator. He records everything. I'm being harassed in my own home. It failed immediately because the evidence, the physical forgeries she had hand-delivered to every mailbox, was already in the officer's evidence bag. Her arrogance had been her undoing. She had signed her own name to a felony. The court hit the HOA, which the judge officially declared dead and buried, with my attorney's fees and the costs of the forensic audit. Karen was hit with 3 counts of mail fraud, 1 count of criminal forgery, and a permanent restraining order. A moving truck arrived 4 days after the hearing. The quiet scene on my porch that evening was the real payoff. Alex, Ben, and I sat out as the sun dipped behind the pines. We ate takeout from paper boxes because none of us felt like making anything complicated. I think I might paint my garage teal to match your door, Alex said, tossing a piece of crust to his dog. I looked at the empty house 3 doors down. The for sale sign was gone. The clacking of sandals was a memory. The stillness was the reward. Bullies like Karen never start with force. They start with tone, stationery, soft language, and the hope that you and Appos, confuse confidence with authority. They rely on the fact that most people would rather give in than deal with the friction of a fight. Boundaries hold when your receipts do. If you and Appos, ever had to stand your ground for what and Appos, yours against. And if stories about justice, patience, and holding the line speak to you, there and Appos, more coming. Go ahead and subscribe. The next morning, the silence on the block was so absolute it had a physical weight. I sat on my porch, watching the first light of a Tuesday dawn hit the empty driveway where the black SUV had been parked just 48 hours ago. My chest felt light, The cold rage of the previous months replaced by the steady, rhythmic satisfaction of a system that had finally been purged of its interference. My name is Elias, and I am a forensic acoustic engineer. I spent the last year of my life documenting the slow-motion collapse of a neighborhood bully who tried to turn a quiet street into a private laboratory. Precision was my trade. Silence was my reward. The sold sign didn't and appos, stay up long. The house that had seen a rotation of Karens, developers, and data mining wellness gurus was finally bought by a young couple who arrived in a beat-up sedan packed with houseplants and boxes of books. They didn't and appos, have clipboards. They didn't and appos, have drones. They didn't and appos, even have a belt that sat above their navels. I stood on my porch as they unloaded a particularly large monster, the vibrant green leaves catching the morning sun. The man, a guy in his late 20s with a messy bun and a t-shirt for a local brewery, looked up and saw me. Hey, he called out, his voice a natural, unmodulated baritone that didn't and appos, record a single decibel of ego. I am Sam. This is Maya. We are your new neighbors. Hope the teal door means you're the cool one on the block. I offered a smile, a real one, the kind that reaches the eyes because there's no hidden agenda behind it. Apos, emeyas. Welcome to the neighborhood. The plow comes through at 6, the coffee at the diner is better than it looks, and the HOA is officially, legally, and permanently dead. Sam laughed, a deep, honest sound. Sounds like heaven. We moved here for the quiet. I looked down the street. Alex was walking Barnaby, who was currently occupied with a very interesting-looking dandelion. Ben was helping Maya carry a box of kitchen supplies. No one was timing the walk. No one was measuring the thermal bleed. No one was quoting a charter from 1892. The quiet scene that followed that evening was the ultimate payoff. I sat on my porch with Sam, Maya, Alex, and Ben. We weren't and appos, reviewing audits or looking at LiDAR scans. We were eating pizza from cardboard boxes, the grease soaking through the bottom in a way that would have made Julian weep. Barnaby was asleep under the table, his tail thumping softly against the wood in a rhythmic, 42 decibel beat of pure contentment. Maya said, looking at my teal door. What's the story with the paint? It's bold. It's a long story I said, leaning back in my chair. It involves a clipboard, a drone, and a very specific kind of forgery. But mostly, it's just a reminder that some boundaries are worth defending. I like it she said. It looks like the sky right before a storm breaks. I stayed on the porch long after they left, watching the stars come out over the valley. The air was cold, the kind of cold that tells you the mountain winter ISN and appos. Finished yet, but for the first time since I moved in, I didn't and appos, feel the need to check the perimeter. I didn't and appos, feel the need to record the silence. The house was warm, the door was shut, and the receipts were filed away in a drawer I didn't and appos, plan on opening again. Bullies like Karen, Thorne, and Victor Don and appos, start with malice. They start with a sense of entitlement and the hope that you're too busy, or too tired, to notice the lines they're crossing. They want to turn your sanctuary into a project, your peace into a data point. But they only win if you let them set the terms. Boundaries hold when your receipts do. And sometimes, the best way to win a war is to be the only one who knows exactly where the line is drawn. This concludes the saga of the block. If you and appos, ever had to hold the line against a neighbor who thought your property was their playground, hit that and yes and in the comments. And if you want more stories of justice served cold and documented in high definition, you know what to do. Go ahead and subscribe the Mirror Moves for more stories like this.